Welcome to Meet Yourself, where we learn what work, life, and relationships can teach us about ourselves and each other.
So, welcome, Charlotte. Charlotte is the founder of My Snapshot, a learning and coaching tool for students. So, I found out about Charlotte through our mutual friend, Angie Wang, who was also on the show before, when I myself was trying to learn more about instructional design to help improve my own courses. And when I found Charlotte's blog, I read so much of it and I became fascinated about her story, her learning journey herself, and just how her mind works. So, I'm really excited to have you on the show, Charlotte. Hi.
Hey, Lucy, thanks so much for the invite and excited to talk today with you.
Yeah, yeah. And so to get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and what you're working on and what you do?
Sure. So some quick facts. I'm half Chinese from Hong Kong, half English. I've lived in four countries: so Hong Kong, Korea, the UK, and Spain. And in those places, I've lived in a bunch of cities like Oxford, Cambridge, Barcelona, and I'm now nestling in a small village in the countryside, half an hour train ride from London. Um, I've had a very varied career. I started out as a professional artist, and then I worked in the health and well-being coaching performance space as a qualified reflexologist and Grunberg method practitioner. I then became really interested in using technology to enable progress and transformation. So I worked with two health tech companies over a 3 year period. Then I worked in online learning, behind the scenes of a number of online courses. And from that experience, I now, the last 3 years, have been working on my snapshot. Um, and yeah, it's a real culmination of all my different professional experiences.
Yeah. How does in can you give just a brief description of how does My Snapshot work? What does it do?
Sure. So it does two things. Firstly, it helps teachers clarify their methodology and communicate that simply and effectively to learners. And then the second aspect is using that methodology to create a self-assessment around it so that learners can track their progress and teachers can personalize the learning experience.
I love that. One of the things I want to get into you more on, maybe towards the end of the this conversation is why that matters so much that teachers know their students' progress, and why does it matter so much that students themselves are able to assess and understand their progress. Let's go back first to your journey, because one of the things I'm very fascinated by is that you have um, you have done so many things in your progression, like you work with the health and wellness in the tech space, right? And then somehow you progress to being really interested in instructional design, and then now you're working with all sorts of companies that have courses and teach people to do various things. And I'm just curious, first of all, what got you interested in health tech, and then what got you interested in learning design after that?
Sure. So basically, towards the end of my 10-year practice called Learn to Be Well, I started realizing that the quality of my teaching had quite a big impact on the quality of my clients' learning, progress, and results. And so I began creating kind of pre surveys that really helped people think through a lot of the things that would prepare them to be successful with me, but also enabled me to help them effectively too. I also invited my clients to collect data on their progress using very simple tools. Um, and I was quite specific in the information I gave them at certain parts of their journey. From understanding what the Grunberg method was, it's not particularly well known, to understanding the learning process that they'll be going through with me. Um, and all these improvements really gave a clear impact to my clients, and their results, and equally to my business. You know, it enabled greater referrals, enabled my business to grow. And the whole reason why I got into working in that way was to enable impact and have greater freedom to live my life from a financial basis too. And so um, I decided to work in health tech to understand how you can use technology. Like I was using basic tools at the time, to do this at a wider scale. And yeah, it was really fascinating. The two companies I worked with, the first, I actually deployed technology in hospitals in the UK using their particular software. So it was really amazing to work on kind of really close hands-on with doctors and nurses and spend hours in hospital departments and corridors and understanding their workflows. And then the second company I worked with was actually around student monitoring, patient monitoring, remote patient monitoring. So it was all the sorts of questions I was interested in. So that was the jump.
You mentioned the Grunbeck method.
Grunberg method, yes.
Grunbeck method. Can you what is that?
Sure. So it's basically the premise is that being well is a skill, and it's something that can be learnt. And so it doesn't offer a therapy, doesn't offer a way of fixing someone. It offers a learning process, a personal learning process for someone to learn the specific skills they need to recover from back pain, improve the way they speak on stage. So the Grunberg method offers a personal learning process for people to expand their attention at a physical, mental, behavioral, and emotional basis to be able to achieve what they want in their life. And so the practitioner will use a number of manual kind of body techniques, directions and instructions to do attention exercises with the client in a one-to-one session. And the idea is in the session that the individual learns how they create the thing that stops them achieving what they want. And because they create it, how to stop creating it and enable what it is they need to achieve what they want.
I love that it's like a personalized process, but one that and one that the principle that you mentioned that it's a skill, right? It really empowers the learner. Even if like let's say they've been told from a young age or they've never performed well in school, even if they never performed well in school or like they've been told that they can't do something, it helps empower them to still be able to expand in like some area, right? That they may have affinity to. Is that kind of how you would see that? Is my understanding correct?
Yes, and I'd say a key differentiator is the learning is done somatically. It's done through the body, which is important because we can often over-index the use of our cerebral skills.
Yeah.
There could be too much focus on understanding versus application and
Yeah.
practice, and it's really through the person experiencing themselves through themselves where they can actually, in a hands-on way, access themselves and facilitate the change they want.
Is it kind
And
of like
that it's that which is really that makes the cut, that makes the difference.
interesting? So it's more like like a body base like kinesthetic type of learning style.
It is.
Is
I
it?
mean, it is predominantly, but it does very much touch the learning required for the person to have identification at a mental basis. So, for example, if we make this very tangible, someone has back pain, mentally they might cut off from it to ignore it. But when they do that, they're also breathing in a particular way, they're
Mm.
holding their body in a particular way, and emotionally they are doing something to numb and ignore that.
I
So it's a
see.
very complete
It's very holistic.
experience.
Yeah.
It's holistic. Yeah, sometimes we can just focus on one of those aspects. And so by focusing on all those four, the person has greater access to what they need. And then there might be one driver that they particularly notice more. And so, for example, if they tense less and breathe more to the area, they're changing their pattern. And so already it's different versus the kind of automatic pattern. And then the more ability they have to access that, the more energy and time they have towards managing their thought patterns that are not helpful to achieve their goal, for example.
Got
And
it.
we would
Got it.
address that. We would address that as well in the sessions, and and understand what it is they're thinking and why they're thinking. And so in that way, it's not just, say with Pilates, for example, which is very good, where you're like, okay, this is like not a helpful like movement for here, which is great. But then if the person emotionally is still avoiding something, they'll make progress. It can be useful to have a more multidisciplinary approach sometimes. And I think, nothing ever stands alone. It's not a complete solution, but it offers a solution that is very helpful and not widely used.
Yeah, it takes the whole. What I love about that is that it takes the whole mind body connection into account to help people reach some goal, some transformation goal of theirs. I wanted to go back a little further in time for you, Charlotte, because when you were talking about all this stuff, one of the things I had remembered, either I heard it from another podcast or reading from your bio, was that um, I remember you had some difficulties, I think, in school. And I think you mentioned dyslexia at some point. And I was actually very curious because later you got into art first, and before you went into tech, and, and then right, and then now as a designer. And I'm very curious, got you, what got you into like art? Like, how did you discover you like creativity was kind of more of your strength? I know because I know a lot of people who they because of um because of either a neurological thing or just maybe by being told certain things when they were a child, they end up kind of boxing themselves in, and then it's not really until age like 30 or 40 that they finally realize, actually, I have lots of strengths and I can do more than what I thought I was limited to. I'm very curious how that journey was for you. How did you go, how did you discover what you were good at and all of that?
Thanks, sure. So I was just very fortunate, to be honest. I happened to come across a book called Use Your Head by Tony Buzan at the age of 13. And it was just, during one of those idle summers as a kid, you're at home, you're bored. And I was just looking through my parents' bookshelf. And it's not that I read a lot as a kid, particularly, and I don't recall why I was exploring their bookshelf, but I saw it there and kind of picked it out. Funnily enough, they didn't even know that they had the book or that it existed. So it kind of feels like a mini miracle. Um, and in the foreword of the book, they talked about a guy who had similar struggles to me. Through the book, learnt how to use his head and went on to go to Cambridge, become the top student in his subject, run the Entrepreneurial Society, and went on to do great things. And that hero story really resonated with me, and I made a decision at that point that I wanted to be, have my own version of that for me, and really devoured the book. And what it taught me is that we have a very powerful brain. We just need to learn how to use it, how to access it. And one of the key things that Tony Buzan teaches in his book, he's known as the inventor of mind mapping, is how to map our minds. And he described how our minds are like trees. You have kind of key branches and secondary, tertiary branches. And actually, to remember things, we don't need to like remember passages of information. We just need to remember key words, and then naturally associations will come from that. And so it really opened a strength of mine, which is creativity, that I didn't know that I had. But I was able to join and connect dots much more readily, and the kinesthetic way of learning, of mind mapping things, the intention between some, to synthesize information, summarize things, and bring your own structure and language to it, is actually one of the core fundamental recommendations to learn effectively that I stumbled across through reading this book. And it really like opened a door for me. It was really to give a contrast. Like, it was like my life was kind of in this kind of gray, sort of mediocre state before, and it became kind of multicolored and multidimensional through this gateway of the book. And yeah, I think life changed a lot for me in that moment of time.
Yeah. And then I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping timelines a little bit. Um
Sure.
When you found that, and then you went into art, right? You realized you had a very creative strength. I'm very curious how that transitioned into wellness.
Sure. So my art kind of focus was over a 10-year period from 13 to 23. And it initially started because, I just got good feedback from my family, from my teachers, and it's always nice to have kind of compliments. But that translated to external awards, and getting into Oxford and receiving a scholarship for being there and being given money to go and travel and go do projects. It's just this never ending kind of stream of goodness and amazingness. And I was very fortunate. And the reason the jump to wellness is, in a way, to access creativity, one needs to learn how to navigate themselves. In a way,
Oh,
that is what capped my creativity and kind of bring it to another level for me.
yeah,
Otherwise you're kind of thinking the same things, doing the same things. And so kind of what we discussed earlier about these patterns that we have, and needing to have greater self-awareness around it, really, I really, in a way, the blessing of being an artist is you're in this kind of white studio and you have a lot of time in your hands, and so you kind of see these patterns play out literally,
yeah,
and how you paint. And one of my kind of last series of works was just doing large, abstract, colorful paintings, and the only kind of ask for me was that I just move to create it. And then what I found very literally was that every painting was completely different, and so it was very literal manifestation of me realizing that who we are is not fixed,
yeah.
that we are our movements, and so we can also choose who we are and how we want to be.
It sounded like you learned a lot about yourself through the reflection of your artwork that you were producing. Is that correct? And then through that,
Yes,
you
and
were,
so
yeah,
the next step
next,
was not to philosophize about it, was to
yeah.
actually go do it in practice and
Oh my God.
develop that skill for
Yeah,
myself as a human being, but also bring that creativity into life.
yeah.
And to really, that's the difficult bit, right? When there's
I,
more
yeah.
when there's more fears and stress going on, and different powers at play, how can you still be creative and grow as a human being?
Yeah, this is kind of fascinating to me in that um, when we create something, right? It's not just about what we create, but it's also you can learn a lot about yourself through those things. And it sounded like this actually made you more interested in like what else, like where else do I have to go, and then you went into the next, the next phase of your journey through that. That is very cool because I think most people, they don't or I don't know if it's most people, but I think there are folks who are like into self-improvement and all of that, and then they kind of get stuck just reading information, and growth doesn't happen. At least I know I used to be in that trap, and growth didn't really happen until I actually applied information in the real world. It's actually like for me it was like I would consume like 90% of information and apply like 10% of it, and then nothing would change, right? But when I switched it over to applying the 10% of information that actually matters, but then 90% is just interacting with the world and then seeing what happens and then learning about myself through that. That's when real growth happened. Unfortunately, it took me 30 years to figure that out, but um, and I just find, have you always been interested in self growth and just like learning more about yourself, like self awareness and self growth? Normal, I think 13-year-olds don't read books like How to Use Your Mind.
Yeah, sure. I had physical symptoms, kind of in my teens, so I experienced a lot of bloating in my stomach,
uh,
and I struggled with things at, kind of at school, to some degree, like the identity thing of being half
mm,
English, half Chinese, and kind of living between two cultures. Um, and in Chinese culture, like acupuncture, drinking kind of herbal remedies, just as part of like your dinner every day. It was also a kind of a normal thing to talk about or engage with in that culture. you saw a lot of people in their elder years, for example, doing Tai Chi in the parks. When you're just like going out and playing in the park, there's also, older people doing Tai Chi. So I think health and well-being is a more, especially at that time, we're talking kind of 30 years ago, it was more talked about in that culture. So I think it was just something I was just generally interested in.
Yeah,
And would read about, as a kid as well, to try and like reduce my symptoms and all that sort of thing.
yeah. Got it. It sounds like, I mean, it's really great that you were kind of surrounded by this environment, which helped, I think, motivate you from what you're saying. So, okay, let's jump forward a little bit into more later in our timeline. So eventually, so you went from art to wellness, and then into the health tech space, and then at some point you it sounded like, I mean, it sounded like you were always interested in learning and how people learn, but it looks like but then like at some point you made the shift into primarily focusing on how to help people learn, especially in the online learning space, which just exploded, especially since COVID. And yeah, talk to me about that. About that transition, what motivated you to go into this next phase, and eventually, how did you come across the idea for My Snapshot?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. As learners, we can put in like, use all these different good techniques, like the feminine technique. So you'll learn more effectively when you teach others that particular topic or skill. You can do mind mapping, you can do all these things, but actually, why not work with the people who provide the learning materials so that the course or the book or the workshop is better designed in the first place, so learners aren't doing all these workarounds to learn well. So that's really the essence of why I work in this way with my snapshot.
Yeah,
But another key thing that I observed in the health tech space when I was there was it's not the tool that creates the transformation, it's how you use the tool. And that speaks to how the learner uses the the tool, whether that's like a course, or an app that they might have on their phone to learn a language, for example. But it's equally how you facilitate the use of the tool, which is where the responsibility of the teacher or the facilitator, coach, consultant, expert, author kind of comes in. Um, and and so that was really the reason why I shifted to learning online, because that's really what enables kind of greater impact at scale.
yeah, and now everyone's so many people have moved online now, and it's become kind of a norm, really, to like if you want to learn something, you find it online, and it's just super accessible. Like learning has never been as accessible as it is now. And uh, what fascinated me about what you do, My Snapshot, is the focus. I mean, if I just look at the what the tool is, it's an assessment tool for assessing whether or not your students are making progress. But I think it's so much more than that, and you kind of touched upon it. It's not just about knowing that, but like what can you do with that information, and what can your students do with that information, and it really helps clarify how they use your course, right? But also and how it clarifies to them, what your learning framework is, and also helps you as an instructor understand what their journey looks like and what you should focus on when you're developing your course. And there's just so much that comes out of just being able to. The word you use was self-assess, like how powerful that is in your life. Can you talk to me more about that? Like, why is self-assessment so important?
Yeah, I think it kind of comes back to this awareness, that self-awareness, and that's something that I've acutely personally gone through as a journey. Initially as an artist, and then working as a practitioner of the Grunberg method, and kind of coaching people, and I was basically helping people train their awareness at 4 dimensions. And the thing with awareness is it allows you to figure out, where you're at, if what you're doing is working or not working. And then in that reflection and assessment of how things are going, either continue or stop or alter or tweak what you're up to. And effectively, everything that we do is a constant iteration. in life, and that's fun. It's creative. It makes things experimental. It makes things light, fun, and so the thing though is if we don't have a framework in which to assess ourselves, we're kind of starting from scratch often, and we're not kind of building on things. If a lot of great thinking has been done by someone on a particular subject, it's useful to share that framework, and then that way people aren't reinventing the wheel, and you can always tweak that framework or build on that framework or change that framework, but you have something tangible in which to start versus kind of start from scratch.
Yeah.
And so it really can expedite the process for the learner and for the teacher in really our pursuit to evolve and grow as humans.
That I was actually, it's fascinating that you mentioned that. I was actually just reading a book called The Ape That Understood the Universe. It's an evolutionary anthropology, psychology book. And one of the points the author makes is that the reason why humans have gotten so far is that we are able to have cumulative knowledge. We are able to like knowledge is not, we're not reinventing the wheel. Like chimpanzees, like, you know, their greatest technological invention is like they can get ants out with a stick or something, right? And that's you know, that's like 100,000 years ago. That's what they're great at. And nowadays, their greatest technological invention is still getting ants out with a stick. But for humans, it's like over the last like 10,000 years, we went from, you know, planting, understanding how to plant seeds to like traveling space. And it's because like every generation we have cumulative knowledge that we pass on, and other animals don't apparently don't have that as a culture, right? And I just thought that was fascinating. And what you're saying is, let's not reinvent the wheels for ourselves. um, I love that. Talk to me about this. Let's see, I had it in my notes. You mentioned something about helping experts clarify their thinking with a model. Clarify, facilitate, empower model. Talk to me about that. What is that?
Sure. Can I share my screen? That might make things a little bit
Absolutely.
easier.
I
Um,
can you do that? I actually don't know. I've never tried that with this platform before.
might not be possible. If not, I can share an image. And you can just like post it in the notes or something.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can actually.
You
I
can
don't think you can.
send me a link to an image if you have that in the chat, and
Sure,
then
sure.
I can just post it there. Yeah, post it in my show notes.
Cool. Perfect. Thanks. Yeah, so one of the so it's kind of like I think the clarify, facilitate, empower model really speaks to kind of two key things. Like one, the process of teaching someone so they actually genuinely learn and apply what they're learning and grow through that process. So, on one hand, the model I developed kind of just simply outlines that. And then the other strand is, and having been in that position myself, like the teacher, you know, needs to make a living from this. Um, you know, for it to be effective and for the learner to have a good learning experience, it needs to be that win-win. And people often go into some sort of teaching, consultant, coaching sort of role because they're interested in enabling that impact. So how can we kind of create this win-win? And so what the model is really speaking to is that process of building a business. And so, we initially want to attract and educate people on what we can offer. So having a framework enables the educator to stand out and to genuinely share what they can do and offer people so that they can understand if that's going to be useful to them, and then select the product that will enable them to achieve their needs. And this model is known as the bow tie model, which is used in sales, marketing, customer success, um, and and then the learner and the service provider, commits to that individual, and really when that person commits and onboards, they are orientating themselves around the learning experience, and they are applying and growing, and the the business, the educator, is really enabling that onboarding and that facilitation and that coaching, so that that learner can grow. And when that happens successfully, that enables like the growth, and that often learning is unfortunately seen as a one-off kind of revenue, but actually it's a recurring revenue opportunity. And ultimately, you want to enable learners, and that they not only see the results that they came for, but they also advocate for the product, the methodology that they've used to achieve that result. And ideally, that that enables then kind of new customers, but also at a kind of a larger level, a community around that approach to learning.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I think like referrals are just that's the surest sign that what you taught people really impacted them, is that they can put their reputation on the line to tell other people about it. Um, I what are the biggest 1 to 2 mistakes that you see course creators or educators make?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest I would say is that educators don't think about why to teach something. They focus more on what to teach. And so that then drives too much content versus a learning experience that is efficient at achieving the kind of A to B that you're bringing a learner on. And ideally that B is an action-oriented outcome, so that the learner is learning through practice and achieving something tangible through the learning experience. And I would say a second one is like people trying to create a learning experience that's too big a jump. I call it like selling the peak of the mountain versus kind of mini peaks along the way, so that they can, learning is difficult. So how can we make it bite-sized and manageable for them, and enable them to feel a sense of satisfaction, so that they feel they can really integrate that, and then take on the next challenge to achieve their larger goal.
That's interesting. I wonder if these two things are also related. Like because you're trying to sell the peak of the mountain, it's like you end up just giving a lot of information because you can't put it into an action. You can't just transformation is not an action. Whereas if you do bite-sized steps, then you can actually make each bite-sized portion like some kind of action that people can practice. I'm very curious about that. Um, what would you? I kind of want to do like a thought experiment with you here. Um, I
Mm.
totally understand why instructors do like just information without transferring it into an action, because I think that's the way we were taught in school, right? We were given a lot of information and then take a test. And I think actually, I'm curious, what do you think about testing? Like, is that a form of taking action? Like, could that count as that? I'm assuming the answer is no, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Because there are some things that I just feel like maybe there's no way to translate it into action, and then what do you do there? I don't know if you've have examples where you've experienced that yourself when working with clients.
Like it's a classic. It depends. There are so many factors in any given scenario. An example of how that can be different is, say, I don't know, say you are learning how to make a recipe, right? You're just like wanting to do it. So one thing would be like learning how to like develop this new technique. I don't know, making ice cream or something. And you just learn and do it, and then there's some sort of test after, or I mean, the obvious thing is to actually make it, and that's how you learn, by doing it. But another good exercise would be to create a blog post or a video showing the process of you doing it, or explaining it to someone else. So often, with a typical like knowledge sort of course, some sort of output like a blog post, or a presentation on the knowledge, like something that, I don't know, that happened in World War II, whatever that is,
Yeah.
shifts it from like just a pure kind of recall exercise to a project-based learning assignment slash assessment.
How do you scale the like grading of that then? Like let's say it is, well, we'll go with the recipe example. You want to make the best ice cream or something. I forgot what the food was. But um you can't have like assuming you're an online course creator, how do you assess like if your students have done it right? Let's say in this case, the recipe, it's not just about, you can make apple pie that I keep changing the food. You can't, it's not about you make apple pie and it's edible, right? But it's like, there's also some taste and style and all, let's say it's a very creative thing. Um, and I imagine it's not scalable for the instructor to like taste test every single apple pie or, look at it, right? And so maybe this is where the self-assessment comes in and you can talk more about that. How do we scale the assessment of people, especially when it's like a more creative kind of output like this?
Yeah, I think that's like the challenge and the fun challenge. And it's easy just to fall back on what we know or what we've seen work or what we've experienced. But actually that's a creative opportunity, isn't it? Because it's in that feedback, in that like testing of ourselves where the learning, takes another dimension. And we can iterate and improve on what we've done. So, one approach could be peer-to-peer feedback, and that can be helpful. But equally, when that happens, there needs to be some sort of guidance so that feedback is useful,
Right.
to the learner. So that's one approach, and you could write some guidelines or create a rubric. A rubric is like kind of grading criteria. So you could explain what good looks like, not poor looks like, and have as many levels as is appropriate for that particular task or learning. But indeed, self-assessment is very helpful and very scalable, and an individual can self-assess themselves as well with their apple pie. What the color of it, the flavor, the texture, the
Yeah.
size, the appearance, and having descriptions around that, or examples.
Yeah.
There's many different ways of explaining kind of what good can look like. The power of self-assessment is, in a way, it's what we self-reflect on, what is where we learn. It's that kind of real digestion of the learning material and the integration of it. And so it could be a combination of those approaches as well. It really depends on the learning experience. If someone's paying a lot, they might want a more high touch sort of feedback loop. If the objective is it's a very scalable course that's free, or at a lower price band, there could be other ways of doing it that you might want to encourage people taking photos of the apple pie and posting on social media and just getting feedback publicly, for example.
Oh,
There's all
yeah.
sorts of creative ways. It really depends, on the context and what is useful, and makes sense for the learning experience and the learner.
At this point, Charlotte, I think you've worked with, I don't know how many creators you've worked with at this point, but it's a lot. Do you want to? I'm curious. Can you share like a story of either like the most memorable or the most challenging project that you had to work with, and what happened there?
Okay, you put me on the spot a bit there.
I know.
There are all sorts of things, really, and challenge is a very relative term. I'm just trying to think what might be particularly interesting. Maybe I could just think of a recent example. I'm working with a teacher who actually has a website agency. Um, he helps all sorts of companies, but particularly educators and NGOs, create websites for their company or organization or course. And he offers kind of one-to-one services. So this is Brian Clover of Maple Creative. Um, and he found that even in his one-to-one services, he had to educate his clients on vocabulary, like, for example, the different elements of a website. So, for example, if you have an FAQ section, you might have the FAQ, and then you can click on it, and then it opens with the answer. So I now know that that's called an accordion, as an element in a website, but it's not obvious if you are new to websites, and website design. And if you're a client of such an agency, um, I mean, you don't need to know the word, but it's an example of having an informed conversation with the company you're working with. So he wanted to develop a course where he could effectively help more people build their websites by making it more accessible at a price point, but equally make it educational too, because it would only benefit his client, and the client experience. And so we created an assessment, and he's called it Website Essentials. And there are kind of 16 elements, with kind of 4 key pillars. Let's see if I can remember them: marketing, content, I think tools was another one, and I'm sure I remember the other pillar.
Sure.
And what's interesting was he has kind of 16 components under each of those 4 pillars. And what he's done for his course is create a very streamlined experience over 5 weeks for people to create like a version of the website that doesn't, and his thing is like, you'll always be building this, rating your website, but it really efficiently gets them from A to B and uses the different essentials of building a website. And the idea is that you take that assessment at the beginning, and at the end, you kind of have a sense of where to focus during the course, but also see where you've improved. And because building a website is a constant process, the assessment is a great way of checking with yourself at intervals that make sense. But what's been really interesting is what he's realized through creating the assessment and the course is that all these skills can have a lot of depth to them. Like, for example, copywriting for your website is an example of one of the essentials. And so he kind of creates deeper mini courses within his kind of learning community for people who want to go deeper in each of those things, and have greater proficiency of that particular essential for their website. So it's been really interesting to work with Ryan, and kind of really unpack what makes a successful website and how to teach that and enable people to improve their website over time, through an effective course, community, and kind of ongoing learning experience.
That it sounded like there's a lot more depth than what was on the surface that you guys had to investigate. You mentioned community quite a few times actually in our discussion, and I'm curious because I don't think this is a very touched upon thing. Maybe it's becoming more touched upon now, as a lot of courses are transitioning into like the cohort model, which community factors in as a part of that. Um, but I know, like in the like before COVID specifically, like a lot of the courses I took, it was mainly just information, and like there may be a community, but it's like no, people don't actually talk in there, right? And to me, I do feel that having a community aspect is very important, but I'm not sure why. And so I'm curious, what are your thoughts on, like, do you think it's like maybe not essential, but like maybe it is. Like, do you think it's essential to have a community if you're trying to teach people, let's say something like, maybe not like a how to, fix your plumbing, but like, or maybe I don't know, but like I'm thinking more of like, what do people pay a lot of money for these days? It's like transformational courses, and yeah, either it's like internal transformation or just like change, behavior change or something like that. I think like those things are kind of the hardest things to teach people, and I find that having a community, a good one, I would say, um, does make a difference. I'm curious what your thoughts on. Do you think like a community is necessary for these types of courses, and like why?
So I've actually written, and given a presentation on this, and I can share a link to it, for
Yeah,
you to refer to,
yeah,
as
I'll put that in
well.
the show notes.
Awesome. So the short answer is it is essential. I would say the community aspect of learning, um, whether the course creator includes it directly in the learning experience they offer, or not, is a question on the type of course it is, and its aims and goals. But effectively, the framework, I share in this article, which I'll share with you, kind of speaks to what is learning, and there are kind of 3 key pillars. So the first is the actual learning experience itself. The second is the individual engaging kind of with that learning experience. It's the individual. Um, and the third is them actually practicing and applying that learning experience and kind of in practice. And so there are 3 kind of key pillars. And then the learning experience pillar, there are 3 components. So I talk about the actual form itself. So it could be a book, it could be a workshop, it could be a course, it could
Yeah.
be through a one-to-one coaching session. And then the second aspect is the ability to actually navigate that experience, because if one needs to understand what the process is and navigate the learning materials. And then the third element is community. And what I mean by community is the ability to have feedback, to learn with others, to have a sense of belonging, support, a sense of accountability. Now, that is something that one can create for themselves with guidance or recommendation from the teacher if it's not part of the formal learning experience. You could share your learning with your friends or family. For example, you could write a blog post about it, as a sense of accountability and a sense of kind of getting feedback. You can include it in your newsletter. So there are lots of ways of self-generating community around your learning experience. The benefit of the course creator including it is that they part of their job is to nurture community within the learning experience directly itself. And so you're not relying on the individual self-initiating that. I mean, the individual still needs to engage with it. They could also not do, but it's that much easier, and it's ideal because the teacher has a number of people who are learning that particular subject, and they have the means, like the ability to email those people, to engage them in the learning experience and bring people together. So there's a lot of benefit to that. And what that kind of, often, if we can have that sense of support and accountability and feedback through others and see other people applying the learning in ways that you might resonate with or might learn from, you're much more likely to go through that incredibly exhilarating and challenging experience at the same time of learning something new. And so it is an important, powerful aspect, and it enables the other aspects of the pillar of the framework I mentioned before, in terms of the individual, enables and stimulates like their own motivation, for example, and their ability, they'll have greater motivation, ability to put into practice what they're kind of seeing, learning, and applying through the learning experience itself.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. It sounds like it's very crucial to the application part of those pillars, that the three pillars that you mentioned. Is that correct?
Yeah, we generally go further together than alone, and it's really through application, through taking action, that we actually learn and transform, as you have alluded to at the beginning of our conversation. And so, yeah, that's where the greatest leverage happens, and where the greatest leverage needs to be, for sure.
Any experiments that you are currently trying, or questions that you're looking forward to exploring more of? So this is, we talked about kind of past up to the present, and now I'm kind of curious about your present and future forward-looking journey.
Thanks. Yeah, something I'm really curious about, and um, experimenting with my clients, um, and exploring with my community is, when people do develop their frameworks, how do they use it, and communicate it effectively in their course, in their marketing, in their books, so that it really carries, and arrives and touches people. What are creative and useful ways to enable that? And also, I think it's not often talked about with teaching, like the coaching aspect of it. And so, particularly with a self-assessment, and when someone does self-assess themselves and self-reflect, how do you enable them on the next part of the journey? What, as they do that, what sort of support, resources, guidance can you offer? How can you further facilitate them in their learning journey?
Helping people with course creators with communicating the value of what they do. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Which I think is a
The
skill
value,
that is so hard to learn, actually. Marketing, and I don't know if that's what you're talking about, but I know that
yeah,
that's like a whole beast for business
it is
owners.
a whole beast. It is a whole beast, and I think that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
The special, unique thing that people offer is, especially if they've done the hard work of condensing what they do into a framework, and communicating that effectively, which is where I bring a lot of people in the work that I do. Is then how do you use that, and communicate that effectively in your marketing and in your course, so it really lands with people, and they really understand it and apply it.
Yeah. That's a very interesting problem to solve. I'm curious to see what comes out of it. I don't know if you're going to start writing more blog posts about this, but I am looking forward to them
Yeah, for
if
sure.
so. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, for
Awesome,
sure.
Charlotte. This is thank you so much for having this conversation. This has been great. I love having you here. Where can our audience find you, more of your work, and work with you?
Well, thank you, Lucy. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you too. I love how you geek out on all these things and are really curious. So thank you for having me. And sure, I have a newsletter called Meta Learning. I can share the link for you to include in the show
Yes.
notes for people to check out. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I'd love to connect with you and learn with you. And I have a website, mysnapshot.co. If people want to learn more about what My Snapshot is and who I am and what I'm up to.
Awesome. And I will include all of those in the show notes below. All right. Thanks, Charlotte.
Thanks, Lucy.
Have a good
It's
rest
been
of the
really
day.
awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Bye bye.